So welcome everyone. We do have a few of you coming through, but we'll give it a few more minutes to allow everybody to come through. But I think we are at about 28. So that's a good enough number to start. Caitlin, are you happy with that?
Absolutely, Matsi. Let's kick off. I'm sure there are many in this digital age that will rewatch this.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I just want to say well done to everybody. It's a Friday and you're here. So clearly, you're quite excited as much as we are. Today, we are officially launching the South African Startup Act Progress Report. It's an exciting one because we're part of the Startup Act movement. We've been doing a lot of work regarding policy reform in South Africa, and I think it's so important that we're able to map and track where we are. So the report is all about what have we done, what are the gaps, and also what are the opportunities. So I would like to take this opportunity to say welcome. We have quite an exciting panel today. It's quite exciting. Familiar faces in the ecosystem, people that are dedicated towards empowering, enriching, accelerating, covering. I mean, Caitlin is I wouldn't say PR queen, but she's somebody that's doing a lot more in the ecosystem. But, her company, Loudhailer, is one that really, really does. It becomes a Loudhailer for all the wonderful work that's been done in the ecosystem. And then Sean, he's actually the reason why we are here today. He's an entrepreneur. He's the reason why we are pushing for policy reform so that Sean doesn't have to be in Belgium to start and grow and scale his business. He can actually be in South Africa and be able to be a proudly South African that's growing a proudly South African business. But we have a lot of policy challenges that make it difficult for the likes of a Sean to be able to, start his business and scale it globally. So that's actually the entrepreneurs in the room today are the reason why we find ourselves here, why we're actually doing and progressing policy reform. And so the report itself covers different aspects of ecosystems and startups, right? So we have been able to have a sense of what's happening around the world, what's happening around the continent. We have had, reports that speak to the Nigerian startup bill that was put in place last year, the Tunisian, which was the pioneer of startup acts in Africa, and then the likes of Kenya. Exactly how it's been able to assist small businesses and high impact, high growth entrepreneurs like the ones that we're trying to support. So I also wouldn't be doing a good job if I don't acknowledge the UK SA Tech Hub, which has been a proud partner. I wouldn't say sponsor because I think as much as financially they've contributed towards the work we've done, it's actually a partnership. They believe in the work that we're doing, and they also believe that by ensuring that the policy environment in South Africa works, it means that we are able to grow and scale South African businesses that the UK can actually do and trade with. So on behalf of the UK SA Tech Hub, I have Tracy, who's going to do a brief, not intro per se, but she's going to speak to what is the UK SA Tech Hub, and also just briefly talk to us about why it is that they're supporting this. So I'll hand it over to Tracy, and then after that, Caitlin will kickstart the South African Startup Act progress report. So also, before I actually go, I haven't actually mentioned Cleola. I know I briefly said panelists, but Cleola Kunene is a great sister, someone who's so passionate about small businesses, and she is from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They are having very, very comprehensive programs, accelerators that are working in empowering and capacitating small businesses. So I'm equally excited to have Cleola. And then we should be having Andrew, who is from the Department of Small Business Development. He is an advisor to the minister in that department, and I think he's having a little bit of challenges with his network, but he should be joining us before we start. So I'll hand it over to you, Tracy, and all the best, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Matsi. Hi, everyone. As Matt said, I'm Tracy Lee from the UK South Africa Tech Hub. And just to give you a bit of a background of what we do and why we are supporting the Startup Act movement, we are from the UK government, looking at how we can support the South African economy through supporting the tech entrepreneur ecosystem. So how we do that is three different ways. We look at how we can connect and convene the ecosystem, how we can bring together the right key people so we can really push forward movement that will unlock new opportunities in the market. We also look at what gaps there are in the market. So we run programs with various partners, looking at funding, skills development, trying to make sure that the right assets are in market so that we can develop the space. And then lastly, we look at policy. And this is where we've been working with the South African Startup movement, looking at what red tape is in play here and how we can support and change those restrictions to really help the space grow. So we've been working with Matsi and her team for quite a few years now. It's been a really interesting space to be working with and supporting, and it's been great just to see how much effort they're putting behind this, because I know how important this is for startups to unlock new opportunities and really growth for South African entrepreneurs. So excited to be joining this panel today and listening in to hear everyone's insights, and yeah, just for us to be launching this report. I'm going to hand over to Caitlin, and just thanks again to Matsi and her team for all the great work they do.
Thank you, Tracy. And hello to everyone who's made the effort on a Friday afternoon and who's watching this live. My favorite part about these webinars is there are real people behind these big ideas and big movements that have the potential to make real historical change for society and for our economy. And today we'll be talking about a couple of things from Cleola and Sean and from Andrew, but really it's about getting to the heart of the matter that everyone can be involved in this movement. And I think it's critical that it's clear to everyone that the South African Startup Act movement is not run by an elite group of people who are solving this problem on behalf of everyone. It is a group of people who proactively came together and have been creating a platform for everyone and anyone who wants to be involved to participate. So advocacy work and lobbying is about increasing the volume, creating the visibility, feeding in partnership opportunities, talking about it and pushing for it. So if you are on here, we are hoping that you will go onto the website and you'll formally sign up to be part of this movement, and you'll start feeding in how you could contribute. And if not directly feeding in, you are familiarizing yourself with the movement and talking about it and adding it to your narrative as an insistence for our economic reform here. Right, so backtracking, thanks Matsi for the very kind introductions to all of us. I think we're passionate people who are very serious about growing innovation in Africa in general. My name is Caitlin Nash. Many of you will know me from Loudhailer. Some of you will know me from the Global Startup Awards Africa. It's really about building innovation-based economies and creating platforms for Africans to be able to innovate and elevate the visibility of that innovation. Right, it is the 1st of spring, and spring is fabulous. New beginnings. And I think what is incredible about this movement is that through partners like the UK SA Tech Hub and Simedisa and the committee that's driving this, significant work and progress has been made on the South African Startup Act. But now it's about rejuvenating it and taking it to the next level. So we're going to get some insights from people on the ground who the policy affects directly or who are assisting to guide and affect the policy. And I'm going to start handing over to them. Let's do a slightly more detailed introduction from each of the participants. So Matsi's done a high-level introduction, but I'd love to hear just about you, your organization, and where you're coming from, and then we'll dive into the questions. Let's do ladies first. Cleola.
Of course, on a beautiful spring day, why not? Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to see that we want to listen to legislative enhancements on a Friday afternoon. It just demonstrates how important this work is. So I'm Cleola Kunene, as mentioned by Caitlin and Matsi. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm part of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and leading the SME development solutions on behalf of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We have quite a few initiatives. We've been in this space, apart from being the largest exchange in Africa and working with business for over 135 years, we've also delved into really looking at how we can support economic development in the country. And a big part of that has been focused on guiding the ecosystem and playing a convening role, especially in terms of capital access. And if you look at our fundamental function, it is about, bringing buyers and sellers together and attracting a lot of capital, but also really playing a tangible role in helping facilitate growth, right? And I'll say facilitate growth because the entrepreneurs are the ones doing the growing. We just, playing a supporting role. And we've worked with quite a number of medium-sized companies, but also with the ecosystem in general. And I'll break down the areas where we've kind of played a role. First, we have an accelerator solution where we work with medium-sized companies, and we've accelerated companies through capital access, development, market access, especially into other countries, and just generally looking at how do we help companies pivot so that, we do have a stronger pipeline of next generation of large enterprises, which we need as a value chain to support the SME ecosystem as well. And then we have a capital matching platform called JSE Private Placements, a phenomenal digital capital access platform where any SME can go and apply, and we will facilitate, that capital matching for them with capital providers, and this is in equity or debt. In addition, we also support red tape reduction, whether it's legislative enhancements or other types of red tape reduction. Sometimes it's not that complicated in terms of red tape reduction. Sometimes it is just really looking at what are the basics that we can put in place to help make things easier for companies. And we really work with the ecosystem in terms of identifying and supporting that. There's a lot of work that happens at a strategic level, for instance, in SADC, where we contribute in terms of the National Development Commission and the changes they're making there. There's work in terms of the Startup Act, but we are also supporting, in terms of the lobbying efforts and, lending our efforts and our voice to the work that the Startup Act is doing. We also are playing a role in terms of seeing how we can amplify our companies. One of the areas where we are lacking, unfortunately, as a country, is amplifying our companies internationally, especially to international investors. And we need to do a lot more of that. And as the JSE, that's something that we're quite passionate about as well. And we're really trying to see how we can, do more of that, put, a voice to the amazing companies we have and attract more capital and, of course, more market access for our SMEs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cleola. That's fantastic. And everyone, we're going to give Cleola a shout out. She has been recognized for all the work that she's been doing and is a winner of the Mail and Guardian Power of Women Award. So congratulations. That news broke, I think, a couple of hours ago. Right.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Sean, give us a quick intro and then let's dive into your full story after Andrew's introduced himself.
Perfect. Thanks, Caitlin. So hi, everyone. My name is Sean Sanders. I'm the founder and CEO of Revix. We are an investment platform. We've been in the South African market for about 5.5 years now. We have duly positioned ourselves. So we've got most of our team based in the UK and then a decent portion of our team as well based in South Africa. I feel like I've got a mini PhD in dealing with exchange controls, dealing with the enterprise investment scheme in the United Kingdom, dealing with just IP formation and movement and all the rest. And just a little bit of background as well on what we've accomplished today. So we've got about 65,000 users. Most of those users are based in South Africa. The core thesis when we really started Revix was the idea to build an index fund in the crypto space. So to make crypto investing a lot easier, and so that you can diversify across the asset class like you would with traditional securities. And then from there, we sort of built on the ambitions. And now we're looking to grow into an alternative investment platform where we'll bolt on other alternative investment opportunities, whether it is investing in, say, private credit, in venture, which would be like other startups, investing in, say, private equity, hedge funds, and the list goes on. So that's what we're looking to do. We want to become the go-to investment platform in the alternative investing space across the African continent, with a presence in Europe as well. So watch the space. There's a few other interesting developments that are coming soon. We've raised about 110 million Rand, and most of that money has been raised from international investors. One of their biggest concerns when we were raising money is, where's your IP sitting? And we were very lucky from the start. And it's sad that I'm saying this, but we were lucky from the start that we got advice on how exactly to export our IP. And part of the reason that I'm actually calling you now from Europe, and I spend most of my year across either in Europe or in the UK. But the reason I'm here is because I have to be here in order to ensure that our IP is sitting offshore. And I think one of the amazing opportunities we have is to change that. So you could actually have entrepreneurs sitting in South Africa wanting to build teams in South Africa. I mean, we've got everything at our doorstep, maybe not all the electricity just yet, but that's also being dealt with. But we've got everything else going for us, really smart people. I think the right sort of work ethic. I think when you've been in Europe and you realize that people take, the whole of August off, you've got a work ethic in South Africa. That's something to be very proud of. And yeah, the Revix team, we're growing. We are hiring now in South Africa and we're hiring across Europe. I'll get into a bunch more on us later on, but I'll just leave it there for now.
Thanks, Sean, and really just congratulations. I think being examples of what can be achieved and setting the bar in terms of how we can aspire to greater things as African entrepreneurs. Thank you that you're here to share your story. Right, Andrew, I wonder if we've resolved the technical issues. There we go. Hi, Andrew. If you could introduce yourself, where you're from.
Yeah. I don't know if they're resolved because I'm coming in from my phone at the moment, so it might make everybody a little bit dizzy as the phone moves and I move. But greetings to everybody. On this spring day. My name is Andrew Murray, and I am serving as advisor to the Minister of Small Business Development. My background is, I suppose, research generally. Started life as a researcher, so in socioeconomic kind of space, policy space, working a lot in economic development and institutional development across the three spheres. So a lot of work at provincial government. For many years, I ran an organization called EXEC, which is a kind of research, but also information management, knowledge portal focused work, and very stakeholder driven. And then worked in the local sphere. So I worked for National Treasury's Government Technical Advisory Centre, supporting city economic development, and now working at national level with the ministry. Mostly work in the public sector, but always looking at ecosystem building, bringing other stakeholders into policy processes, partnership facilitation. And I think that's where we're trying to go as the Department of Small Business Development. I think acknowledging some of the limitations that the department has in terms of resources and capacity, and the need to kind of play more I suppose, an ecosystem coordination role or mobilization role. Coordination probably sounds a bit sort of pompous, if you like. So I think it's more about ecosystem coordination, unlocking what's out there, identifying gaps in the ecosystem, and trying to see where, as the department, we can add the most value. Obviously, it's quite a mindset shift for government to move out of just a very narrow direct delivery kind of mode of operation to one where you actually trying to look at what the rest of the ecosystem's doing, and A, making sure you don't get in the way where things are working, and B, making sure you can enable in other areas. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do as DSBD, and also sit on the SA Startup Act Movement Steering Committee, and yeah, really supportive of the great work that's being done here. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. We really appreciate. I know you have a very hectic schedule, and I think it's valuable and an important market signal that all three of you are here. And I think the point is this, that there are very serious, influential, connected, committed people backing and advocating for this, and we would like to have 10x the amount even more. Right, we're going to delve into a conversation. I would like to encourage all of those who are dialed in here in the chat box, if you want to. Be lovely to know who you are, where you're from, what is your interest or connection in the South African startup movement. You're welcome to share your contact details if you'd like to see this as a networking connection opportunity. And if any of you have a very specific way that you would like to support the Act, that would be great. In terms of how we're going to use our time, we're going to do a round of questions with each of the panelists to talk about your organizations and sort of your journey and where you're at, kind of current realities. And then the second half would be the solutioning. Where can we troubleshoot? Where can we push? How should we be thinking? And then we're going to work towards about 5 to 10 minutes of questions that can be directed at the panelists. So you are welcome to put your questions on as we have a conversation. Should I be able to integrate it into our discussion, I'll do that. Otherwise, we have an incredible moderator, Kingsley from Simodisa, who's helping us at the back. It's not ChatGPT, there's a human there. And let's get stuck into some real conversation. Sean, let's start with you. South African entrepreneur, does it? Starts not just a business that's successful, but very innovative, pushing the frontiers in terms of pioneering new industries that are still emerging, not just here in Africa, but globally, and you're successful. Tell us your story in terms of the current reality. What's been incredible, but what has not been incredible? And the idea being that these are the items being addressed by the Act.
Perfect. So just a bit of background on Revix. As I said, just over 5.5 years ago, we started this business. And when you go out to explore an idea and try to turn this idea into a commercially viable business, you need capital, of course. I mean, it's the lifeblood of an ecosystem. And venture capital across Africa, I mean, it's grown exponentially from where it was, say, 5 or 8 years ago, but we're still so far behind the rest of the world. And that was a very big challenge. And it's a challenge we see every single day when we chat with other entrepreneurs. And I was very fortunate. I mean, I come from an investment banking background. I'll never forget, just a bit of a side story. I came from a cushy office. I had a beautiful office with those thick finance carpets. And I remember walking into the startup that I was bootstrapping with a door, quite literally on stilts. That was the desk. And it was this realization where it's like, oh, you're knee deep into this. You're going to be going and you're going to make this a success. And I was fortunate, right? Because I came from this background that enabled me to meet wealthy individuals. And one of the companies that I used to work for, it's a JSE listed company called Subvest. They became our first investor. And they then made introductions to other investors. And it's been an incredible journey. I mean, we've got about 47 shareholders at Revix, the vast majority of which are international. And that is something that needs to change. I think you need to have the investor base that is South African. You need to have corporates that are investing in South African businesses. So I think that's one of the challenges that we need to look at and something we desperately need to improve. If you also look at what we had before in South Africa, you had the Section 12J scheme. That was an incentive for taxpayers effectively to get a tax rebate should they invest in a qualifying venture capital fund. And that venture capital fund could then deploy money into a South African startup, or to a startup more broadly. And that was done away with. And there may have been some good reasons why it was done away with. But if you now look at, say, the United Kingdom, there's the SEIS, so the Small Enterprise Investment Scheme, as well as the Enterprise Investment Scheme known as the EIS scheme. And this effectively is very similar to the Section 12J structure that we used to have in South Africa. And it gets investors, so everyday people, involved in startups. And this has been an incredible opportunity for us. And it's something that I would really support being reintroduced into the South African ecosystem. We've spoken about this so many times before in different forums and on different chats and all the rest, but the exchange controls that we have in South Africa, it makes doing business in South Africa almost impossible. If you're an investment platform like Revix, and we're looking to onboard, say, an international client, whether they are from Botswana, whether they're from the UK or elsewhere. If they come and they join Revix South Africa, they have to do an international SWIFT payment into South Africa. We all know how painful it is to try and move money then out of South Africa, which means it makes more sense for us to go and get regulated in Mauritius or to get regulated in Austria, like what we're doing, than to onboard those international customers directly to Revix South Africa. And just such a small change there. And I know exchange controls is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But if I had a magic wand that I could wave and there would be a significant change, it would be the lessening of exchange controls, or just some way that things could become exchange controls could become just something that's a little easier to manage. And it really is difficult to manage. It's bureaucracy that more than you can ever say. I think another thing that you can start looking at in the South African ecosystem is having an ESOP-like scheme. So an ESOP, and effectively a way to incentivize your employees with stock options. In the UK, they've also got a scheme called the EMI scheme, so the Enterprise Management Incentive Scheme. And here you can have a tax advantageous scheme, because currently, let's say you've had an employee that's been working with you for a couple of years. You want to now reward them with stock options. If you reward that employee in South Africa currently, they get penalized with income taxes. So it would be the same as you giving that individual money or giving that individual a salary. And that is something that, again, I think through a policy change or an introduction of sort of a new policy around this, and maybe there is one. Actually, this is just an area that we've only looked at really in the UK, but that would be another big opportunity to introduce in South Africa, because all of a sudden now you're getting your employees buying into your vision and your dream within this business. And then just coming back to the capital side of things, I mean, earlier this year, I was flown out to Hong Kong, Invest Hong Kong. We're looking to effectively bring entrepreneurs from all around the world to Hong Kong to actually learn more about the ecosystem there, to understand the intricacies of the IP ownership, the tax structuring, etc. And that's what we are up against in South Africa. You're up against very well-funded international organizations and countries that are looking to lure entrepreneurs. And it's very difficult when you start dealing with the likes of a Dubai or say Saudi Arabia, where they've got effectively unlimited money relative to South Africa. And it means that policy becomes more important than ever. And it means that you need to make the visa process a lot simpler. You need to do all these little things. Otherwise, you will have entrepreneurs that land up looking internationally and land up leaving. And that is fundamentally what's happening. And I mean, this is a fantastic first step in a way for us to be able to deal with this, to voice the concerns that the industry has and to go, okay, well, how do we actually work around this? And I'm very excited about trying to bring business back to South Africa. You kind of walk in the UK and it's crazy. You walk in the UK, you spend a bit of time in Canada, you spend a bit of time in Australia. There's a South African accent around every single corner. It's completely crazy. It's like something I've never seen before. And it's a little bit sad because you're like, well, everyone talks so fondly of home, but you're not home. You're abroad. And that's the opportunity that we have to change. And if you want to have a purpose to get behind something, I mean, beyond the business purpose that you get behind, I think that's something that personally gets me really excited.
Thank you, Sean. I think for myself, but for many people on this call listening, it's important to hear your story. The reality of the fact that we have, unlike many other African countries who struggle, we have the stimulation and the success of growing startups here in South Africa. Our challenge is retaining them. And thank you for raising the fact that there's a global competition for talent, and not just staff, but actually companies. So Cleola, I'm going to direct it over to you now from a JSE point of view in terms of your programs and how you support. I think one thing that has to be flagged is there is a great sense of urgency around this. It's not a nice to have. It is a very real reality in terms of how South Africa is being affected in terms of venture capital and startup growth, which consequently affects jobs. I would love to hear from your point of view from the JSE and yourself, where you are and your primary objective in terms of support.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. So I think in terms of the Startup Act with its exchange controls, we absolutely support that, right? Not just for startups, but SMEs across the board. because we do understand the very real need, right, for some legislative enhancements. There is, however, also a lot of work that has been done, right, in terms of whether it's, even if you look at the master plan from Department of Small Business Development, the financial inclusion work that's come out of National Treasury, etc. Realistically, these things should lead to tangible change, right? But there's a gap between what we strategize about and what we implement as an ecosystem. And I think as the JSE, our role has been to work with the ecosystem to try and enable implementation, and not just in terms of the actual, strategies, etc. So there's a lot of work that we do directly with SMEs, of course, in terms of developing SMEs. There's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of facilitating capital access. But most of the work that we've been doing is also working with government entities, working with the development ecosystem as well. And perhaps that's where the gap lies, is that we as an ecosystem are doing a lot, right? But how is that translating into tangibles? So if we're all doing things in bits and pieces, in our own little islands, we can't be doing, we're spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, but it's not necessarily always translating into a cohesive shift, and with clear timelines about how quickly we want to see those shifts. And I've been in that space where I've developed companies and seen them thrive, and now seeing them leave the shores. It's deeply painful, right? To put so much time and effort and resources behind getting companies to be, to scale, and then they get better opportunities in the US, for instance, or in Canada. And yes, Canada is actively trying to steal our companies. This is real. So you see countries offering and making concerted efforts and offering real opportunities for companies to come to their shores. Why? They understand that the benefits of economic growth lies with SMEs, that the innovation that South African companies brings revenue and employment. So we cannot take for granted the impact of South African businesses. That's why as a JSE, we are making concerted efforts to support SMEs. My colleague Anne Clayton, who heads up our policy space, is doing a lot of work as well in that space, and she's also quite great at lobbying. And one of the things that we're looking at as well is looking at tax incentives for listed small cap companies, right? That does not mean that we're not supporting unlisted companies. Of course, we're doing quite a lot of work in unlisted companies, but we have to start somewhere. So in terms of that piece of work, maybe later when we delve into questions, we can talk about that as well. But we've done significantly more around capital readiness as well, because the gap between capital access and growth and capital access is also capital readiness. We're not necessarily cohesive in understanding how capital readiness and capital access works. The credit risk, for instance, is hindering a lot of capital access. If, for instance, we look at things such as guarantee funds, such as central credit registries, we should see such shifts in access to capital as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing, working with the ecosystem, looking at how do we convene, how do we come together, how do we identify the real challenges, and how do we shift those in terms of not just providing capital, but also getting companies to the point where they can actually access capital, and getting the ecosystem to the point where they understand how to meet the SMEs halfway.
Thanks, Cleola. It's very detailed. It's positive to hear how the JSE is thinking, and I appreciate your feedback there. Andrew, I want to call on some of your insight. So as a special advisor to the Minister at the Department of Small Business, but also having had quite a long journey yourself in the government system, it is very clear that for public-private collaboration to work, private sector and ecosystems need to be organized. But we're seeing a relatively mature sense of organization at the moment. Can there be efficiencies, as clearly as mentioned? Yes. But is there a relative maturity of the ecosystem? Yes. My question to you is, when the ecosystem has been engaging all these departments and all these ministerial initiatives, it hasn't 100% gained traction. What is your insight in terms of how we can be successful to get interministerial collaboration? And then what would success look like for your department? Andrew, I think you are on mute, and I'm glad to see your laptop is back. Thank you.
Okay, it's not my laptop, it's another laptop, yeah. But good to
Wonderful.
be back and not shaking with a phone, like making everyone dizzy. So yeah, look, I mean, it's the $1 million question that you're asking, and I think, look, there is a major effort, if I can say that, from government at the moment, to reach out and try and draw in other ecosystem players. And you're seeing that whether we're talking industrial policy and all of the 18 master plans that have been developed, whether it's the work that we're doing as DSPD, and a lot of that's driven around the National Integrated Small Enterprise Development Strategic Framework. But the problem with government, and I think I'll be upfront here, you know, as soon as you're talking about partnering with other ecosystem players, particularly the private sector, we as government and as the state more generally need to be able to partner ourselves. And I think if you look at the Harvard Growth Lab assessment of the master plans, the Reimagined Industrial Strategy and the master plans, one of the core findings of that is this weak public coordination. And then when you've got weak public coordination, it undermines trust in the entire ecosystem. So that's something that we really kind of need to get right, if I can say that. You know, overcome that sort of typical silo mentality and competing, whether it's departments, whether it's spheres, etc., etc. I think in terms of, you know, how you deal with that. Yeah, in terms of how you deal with that, obviously government's got its own structures. So there's clusters, there's cabinet committees. But I think what you would need for something like this, the kind of Startup Act movement agenda, if you like, is a dedicated interministerial committee that puts its head around these. Because you've got the visa issues sitting with Home Affairs, you've got the foreign exchange control issues and the tax incentive issues sitting with Treasury, you know. So you've got the skills issues sitting with Department of Higher Education. You've got the innovation ecosystem, the ideation, the prototyping, the IP registration, all of that sitting with science and innovation. And then you've got the entrepreneurship support sitting with us as DSPD. So you've got a whole range of different departments that need to come together as government, never mind about the rest of the ecosystem. The one thing I would also advise, and I think that's where you're going on this, is legislation, because legislation kind of compels government to act in a certain way. And whether that's a separate Startup Act, or whether I think you leverage something like the National Small Enterprise Act, which anyway is already going into Parliament. You know, we're busy establishing the Small Business Ombuds, and also establishing the new Small Enterprise Agency, which brings CEFA and CEDA together. So there already is a parliamentary process that's about to kick in. So I think these are opportunities, I think, for the SA Startup Act movement to really kind of get that pinned down, you know, through legislation. Yeah. And then just in terms of the question about, you know, what we'd like to see, I suppose, the kind of big picture vision, you know, obviously, and I think the minister always says this, you know, it's National Development Plan, 90% or 9 million of the 11 million jobs coming through, you know, MSMEs. So everybody says this, and you know, the recent IMF report on the South African economy, if we deal with the structural weaknesses, load shedding, logistics, bottlenecks, etc., we can get it up to 3%. You know, I think we've got the understanding, if you unleash the MSME and startup sector and entrepreneurs, we'll hit that 5% growth. You know, and then boom, we don't have this what is now a fiscal crisis, and we're seeing all the cost containment measures coming into place now. You know, we don't have a fiscal crisis, we have a growth crisis. It's an economic growth crisis. And I think the only way to deal with that, and we have an inequality crisis. So the only way to deal with that is through MSMEs. They give you growth, they give you jobs, they give you inclusivity. That's the triple challenge, is where you nail it down. But we know the ecosystem's under-resourced, under-capacitated, and people are working in corners. So it's, how do you get together? And it's a difficult space. I know we had the summit last year, and we had a special session for the SA Startup Act movement and the sort of high growth startups. But you kind of get very quickly into, well, what is a startup? Why should we give special attention to the high growth startups? You know, and I think we, you know, as the department now, we're trying to take a segmented approach to say, look, we have to work across the spectrum. You know, we're going to work with the micro, informal, and they've got their own issues, their own red tape. They need their own funding instruments, their own market access support. They need their own ecosystem, basically, you know, all the way through to the kind of tech, high growth startups, which need their particular ecosystem. And I think that's what the SA Startup Act movement's done so well, is articulate that ecosystem. Now we just have to get it into action. You know? But government is going to be a big kind of player in that. And we need champions, I think, first of all. So I think it's great that there's been engagement with a couple of different ministers who all seem to be on board. But now we need, I think somebody said earlier, I think Cleola or somebody, we need, it's not just about talk, or maybe it was you, Caitlin. You know, the strategies are all fine, but it's about action, you know. And I think that's the one thing we've kind of lacked as a country, the execution side of what we're talking about. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. We appreciate that. I think Cleola was talking about the need for tangible action, and I was talking about the need to act with urgency. Cleola, I'm going to route it back to you now. I would love to know, especially for those who have made time on a Friday to listen, sort of what your take is on the call to action. But also, I'd like to know your thoughts on Triple BE. So the progress report states, the current focus on ticking ESD initiatives has been problematic, with many of these initiatives failing while still earning companies Triple BE points. I would love to know your thoughts on that, and then perhaps you could end with your own advice or call to action to the community here.
So I mean, let's start with just you know, to latch on to Andrew's point. Absolutely agree, and there's so much that's happening. We need to get better as an ecosystem, and getting better as an ecosystem means having a real look at incubation and ESD, and what is the purpose of ESD? How does an SME go into an ESD program and walk out understanding that they've been, you know, really supported? Do they have a clear financial model, a business model? You know what I mean? Do they understand how they're going to market? So perhaps, you know, one of the things where, and I know CEDA has put together quite a comprehensive view of what an accredited incubator should include, or an accredited ESD program should include. Again, it comes down to implementing and monitoring, right? So not necessarily in terms of where the issue is with Triple BEE, but because if you look at that, it's about saying, is it fair? Is it equitable? Is it transparent? Is it competitive, right? And that doesn't veer too far from ESG, which is fundamentally similar in saying, do you have the ESG governance in place to understand that when you do procure services, for instance, or when you do run programs, is it fair? Is it equitable? Is it transparent? Is it competitive? Is it cost effective? All of those things. So I think that's a completely different conversation, but around the effectiveness, if we get better as an ecosystem, understanding the value chain. So the value chain of solutions, starting with when you're learning about entrepreneurship at school level, when you have ideation, where do you go? Who is supporting you? What does that support look like? To the point, if you're saying you want Series B funding, the value chain, whether it's in terms of funding, whether it's in terms of development, whether it's in terms of legislation, all need to align, and we as an ecosystem just need to get better at understanding what is the role of you if you're playing in this space. What is your role? Where do you fit in? And what exactly are you contributing? And can we assess whether your contribution is actually meaningful and helping SMEs, so that we don't have a situation where we're just paying lip service to SME growth? I'm going to quickly just use an example of what they've done in India, because I love it so much, right? And I'm sure most of you know NASCOM and what they've done in the space. I mean, they started this in the 90s and they said, think digital, think India, right? Now, we in South Africa have a huge skills gap in terms of the digital space. I think about 800,000 if you had to put it down to numbers. And that translates to about 60 billion that's going offshore per annum, being outsourced. Why? Because we don't have the skills. Now, to get to the skills doesn't just mean that people are learning the skills at university level. There has to be a value chain in terms of, nursing the skills. And you can't just pump people into corporates and expect that the corporate is going to churn out a senior developer, because they don't necessarily have the time or the resources to ensure that that person is skilled properly. Now, India has done a phenomenal job, and we can look to that example and many other examples to how an ecosystem can come together. They looked at, how do we feed skills? How do we fund for the skills? How do we place them in jobs? And ultimately, how do we create market access? And I think this is what we need to do. We need to look at our ecosystem. We need to look at our value chain and properly manage it and monitor it to ensure that we don't have gaps and things falling through the cracks, and then start thinking that the problem is, is BEE, when the problem is actually we're just not understanding the challenges and how to fulfill it properly.
Thank you, Cleola. So Sean, I'm going to move on to you. I think, Cleola, that was a great segue, because we're saying we need jobs, we need jobs, we need jobs, but we also need skilled people in this new digital economy to fill those jobs. So I know, as you said, you're building and you're thinking about your skills. You're an entrepreneur that's been forced to move to another country in terms of accessing the capital you need to grow. I would love to hear your story around, how does a company like yours fit into solving our jobs crisis, and where is your head now in terms of the reality?
So in total, Revix has employed about 135 people, and the majority of those individuals were in South Africa. Actually, still the majority is in South Africa. We are a smaller workforce now, but we have started to shift that proportion overseas. And the reason for that is because we are domiciled in the United Kingdom, our holding company is based there. We get research and development grants every single year from HMRC, the equivalent of SARS in the UK. Now, we've got about £1.2 million since launching Revix from HMRC, because we've built IP. And when you build IP, of course, the government wants to incentivize you to keep that IP in that particular jurisdiction, because when it gets sold at a later date, there's capital gains tax and all the rest. So it's this really long-term perspective, which is phenomenal. I think South Africa needs to learn from that, because what we are now incentivized to do based on how the scheme works is we are incentivized to hire people in the United Kingdom that are doing research and development work. And those are generally the individuals that are getting paid the highest wages. And we can claim back then, to be specific, 3 times what they are charged in PAYE every single month. That's sometimes more than their salary. So you can be sometimes getting more than the salary of an individual back from HMRC in the UK. Now, that's an incredible incentive. How do you compete with that? And I think you can. I honestly think in South Africa, because you're not dealing with somebody that is 3 to 4 times more expensive on a monthly basis. And if you were to institute a similar sort of structure in South Africa, and I mean, I think you could literally just focus on, let's say, software development. If we just wanted to focus on creating really great homegrown developers and we had to hone in on this, we could, I think, bring a lot of talent back to South Africa, or we could at least inspire a lot of talent in South Africa and investment into talent in South Africa just by doing something like that. But I don't think you can do this in just one area. This requires every single facet of business to be working together. That sort of public to public sort of approach that was mentioned earlier, because it's not just about the IP being offshored, or it's not just about the research and development grant. It's about having electricity. It's about feeling confident in the rand, that you'll hold your treasury, as an example, in South African rands, rather than doing what we're doing, which is to say, listen, the rand's too volatile, we're going to move this offshore. It's going to clearly, obviously, we know about the JSE and we know about a lot of the initiatives that you guys are working on, but it's about being able to build a successful business and then engage with local funding partners to either do an exit, so to locally list, which is not something that I think a lot of South African companies are looking at doing. They're looking at the US exchanges, they're looking at European exchanges, probably to a little bit of a lesser extent. And then if you're looking at debt funding, I mean, the private markets are just gobbling everything up. They're not necessarily going to the likes of the JSE or other sort of providers at this stage. But I think that comes down to the South African Reserve Bank's exchange controls more than anything else at this stage. So, as you can pick up, I'm not the biggest fan of exchange controls. It's made life very, very difficult for us. But honestly, there's so much we can do. And I think this is the big opportunity, because we have had wind against us. Like, we have not had tailwinds. We really have been fighting an uphill battle. I think we must be the winners at scoring own goals over the last few years. And the flip side of this is that there's so many easy wins here. Like, let's get the electricity right? Let's institute something that's going to be focused on encouraging startups to remain or keep their IP in South Africa. And like, that'll be the first very big step forward. So I'm incredibly excited about what the future looks like. We can learn from foreign neighbors, and I don't think we should be trying to innovate everything from the ground up. Look at the UK, look at Dubai, look at Singapore, look at what they're doing in the States as well. Florida, Delaware, they've got incredible incentive schemes. And I think there's a lot of that we can implement locally.
Thank you, Sean. And I think what we've picked up in a lot of the conversations is there's nothing wrong with you speaking out critically. We need people like you to say where the barriers are. If we are incubating and growing our talent and have the potential, and also have the national commitment to want to grow South Africa, that is priceless. So if we could remove those barriers collectively, there really is change on the horizon, but it will take a lot of us. You spoke about digital skill. I will do a shout out for the Collective X initiative. So if you are somebody who supports movements in the ecosystems, have a look at the collectivex.org, which is a national movement working on the digital skills crisis in South Africa. Then perhaps, Andrew, I can come back to you. So Sean says there are many easy wins, and I don't expect you to have all the answers, but as government, do you think the message is getting through to the right people? Are we as a nation really focused to position South Africa as a competitive innovation economy? What are your thoughts there, and your thoughts around what we could do from a global positioning point of view?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Caitlin. No, look, I think you spot on in the sense that it's what's absolutely needed. But in South Africa, there's just so many other issues and probably distractions. Some of them are real issues that take attention away to building a future fit economy, a high growth economy, and even I think embedding, I suppose, the need for growth, that growth is, our core priority. That's not necessarily sufficiently shared, I think. So we've got to look at, models that tackle growth, tackle inequality, have sort of traction, across the kind of stakeholder and political spectrum. So I think that it's probably that's quite an art, I think, in terms of that. I think that the good signals for me coming, the president, I know he met with, I think it was the SA Venture Capital Association, and I know after that he instructed the minister I advised, Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams, and Minister Nzimande from the science and innovation side, to look at the venture capital industry and how that can be enabled, both through kind of red tape, but also through first loss facilities and kind of public sector de-risking, etc., etc. And I thought, wow, that's great that the president is kind of paying attention to this space, Look, we've got, an incredible ecosystem, and I mean, I really hear Sean, and I think it's great that the movement has given voice to the Seans of the world, that people in leadership understand that we're losing our best talent, we're losing our innovators, and there's no way you build an economy, because it's not just in that tech space. That filters across it into competitiveness across all industries. And it's not just about we can just import that technology from elsewhere. It's not like that. We've got to kind of build our own technology base and innovation base. So I think a lot of it, if you look at South Africa, for me, and without kind of sounding like political or anything, but we've kind of moved from a very kind of, I suppose, an economy that is overly kind of rent-seeking, if you like, and we need to move to an economy that's really built on sort of entrepreneurship. And I think if we really kind of get behind entrepreneurship, and obviously innovation is the main ingredient for entrepreneurship. So if we can really put more resources into that, get that ecosystem working properly, I think, and there's little things like, for me, real glimpses of kind of green shoots. The initiative we've got with DSI, with the CSIR, the Innovation Bridge Portal, and that's a kind of digital platform that kind of brings different ecosystem players from the innovation space through DSI all the way through to the entrepreneurship space, which is more in our terrain. So there's those kind of glimpses, and I think digitalization will also kind of open up all those spaces. So I put a lot of kind of hope in where we're going with 4IR and digitalization. Obviously, there's issues. But I think for me, leadership is kind of twigging onto where we need to go. But I think we need that critical mass. So if the Seans can start, shouting louder, and I hear that, we need more critical voices out there. It mustn't just be a small little isolated group of sort of tech entrepreneurs. It needs to be embedded. So Cleola, the JSE as a major institution, should be shouting from the rooftops about these issues, etc., etc. And we need, whether it's a Black Business Council, we need other formations on board, because to lock into this kind of entrepreneurship and innovation driven growth, which we need. So I think it is about mobilizing and building that. Let's call it whatever you want to call it, like a coalition, not the kind of nasty coalitions that we know about in politics, but like a real coalition of interests that can take us on a new path as a country.
Coalition for catalytic change for our economy. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Andrew, we
Exactly.
have one question, and if you're not the right person to respond to this, don't receive the question. There is a question asking, has the proposed act been presented to DSBD Portfolio Committee in Parliament? So perhaps from an update point of view, where are we sitting in terms of presenting the recommendations?
I think Matsi on the platform. She would be a better person, but definitely, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, it hasn't. But Matsi, I think, could, because I think for an act, you almost needs to go through a department, into cabinet. So you either have an executive bill or you have a parliamentary bill. So there's two ways of developing legislation in South Africa, either through the executive or through parliament. So either can introduce legislation, but there's no processes that I've been aware of with the SA Startup Act.
Thanks. I think I know I attended the breakfast at the British High Commission that the UK SA Tech Hub hosted. And what I can recall is that the recommendations have been presented to various departments and key people within those departments, including Treasury. And there certainly has been significant traction in terms of accessing political and bureaucratic administrative champions. And I think given that it's 4:02, I am going to start closing off the session. And I can see that most people have stayed. And I'd really like to thank you for that. Please make sure that you engage with the report. It's really palatable. It's not difficult to engage with. You don't have to be a lawyer. Please go onto the website, download it, register to be part of the movement. Kingsley, I don't know if you want to put up the QR code, but in the interim, I would encourage everyone to make sure that you are directed there. And I think the big call here is build relationships. Use your voice, tell your story, get out there. And as Audrey accurately shared in the chat, a good place to do that is at the SA Innovation Summit that's coming up. So where ecosystem builders like Audrey are creating platforms for ecosystems to build and connect, make your way there, connect and have conversations so that we can amplify the stories that need to get through to the decision makers. Right, on that note, everyone, have an incredible spring weekend. We look forward to connecting. Find us all on LinkedIn. And if you've got any follow-up questions, you can direct it to any of us. Right, have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you to Kingsley and the CIMADESA team. Go well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.